Hey, what's up, guys? We're here, and today I'm trying to bring something new to my content offerings. So, this is going to be my first attempt at doing a painting tutorial video. So, please let me know if I can improve on this or if you want more of these types of contents. So, yeah, I will be doing the pure makeup dry brush method as it is the laziest way for me to get good tabletop standard models onto the table. And you don't really need to be super good. You just need to be aware of the basics of light to dark. This method applies for any miniatures, actually. So you don't have to be a Warmachine player in order to appreciate this video. And what I want to showcase is, like I said, you don't need to be good to have good painted models. You just have to be dedicated. So let's start. So first of all, I typically prime all of my models black with a generic flat black paint. And then I go over it with another basic black acrylic. I am using the black Arcus Miniatures paint. It's a Philippine brand. But any black could do. It could be Vallejo, could be GW, just a solid matte black. And I am using what I believe is called a crease brush. I'm specifically using makeup brushes that my wife actually stopped using. So if you don't have anyone that you can, mooch off of these from, they're relatively cheap if you go to like drugstores or Japan stores. I believe this is actually my second set. My original ones that my wife actually gave me were already beaten to death because this method will actually kill a lot of your brushes. So yeah, I bought the brush for like 250, 300 pesos. It comes with a, I believe that's called a crease brush. And that's what I typically use to base coat a lot of my models. So I'll describe the brushes once I swap them out. So for now, this is just mostly priming black and repainting the parts that the spray missed. So let's fast forward to the next step. So once I have all of my models perfectly black coated, I switch to my first base coat, which is violet, but I'm not using it pure. I just put it on my dry brush palette. So this is a unique thing. I forgot to talk about it at the start. So I bought this a couple of years ago from Artist Opus when they actually popularized the pure dry brush method. But you can use any palette that you have. Most of the time, I just actually use the dry brush palette to scrape off some of the excess paint and typically just grab the colors that I need, mix it on the brush itself. So here you can see me mix the purple with the black. And I'm sorry for my terrible camera work, but hopefully you can still see me painting that very, very, very dark purple onto that cap. So what I really like about the crease brush is it's an angled brush. So you can actually use it to get to the nooks and crannies of the model that you need. And in here, I'm not really trying to paint out all of the blacks. I want some of those blacks remaining. So the thing is, this is a dark to light method. So you want to paint all black and then gradually gradient your way up to the lightest color. So like I said, this is a purple mixed with black, and I'm just, dry brushing it around as much as I can. I am not really being very careful when I do this. I do try to be careful only in the cases where I don't want the purple to actually reach. So like I said, the areas under the cat's belly, the areas in the joints where they fold, I try to keep that as black as I can, the bottom of the jaw. So here, the underside of the weird quills for this cap is still trying to be black. So now I believe I have updated the mixture to be more purple. And oh, there. So here's a farther shot of that. You can see all the paints that I was planning on using. And yeah, I just gradually move up. And so here's just more purple. I don't add any more black. I believe the black stays on the brush. So while you do that, it'll just, mix and mix until you get to that pure purple. Here you can see me just add more purple. So let's speed the process up and go to the next layer. So here is more of the purples being applied. I think this is just the pure purple now. And you can see there's a bit of gradation already happening. So you can see like below the tail is dark, below the quills are dark, but on top of the actual color where the light actually hits, you can see it go as solid purple. So again, let's go to the next step. So here I bring up the next color, which is Vallejo Game Air Warlord Purple and Artist Paints Magenta. So I have two because I wasn't really sure which one was brighter or, which color I actually like better. So here I believe I tested out both colors and ultimately decided that the next lightest color would be the the Arcus Magenta. So here I just go back to that purple, mix in a little bit of that magenta, and go to town again, trying to build up layers of paint. So I still try to keep purples where I want purple, but overall I want to get to the highlights more. So let's speed this up for now. So here I'm just speeding up all of the footage, building up the colors. You can see me just mix purple and magenta in various degrees, typically going from dark to light. And you can actually see the color develop on my thumb as I test out the paint. So ideally, you're going to see your color go from the super black all the way up until, at least for this purple, going until pink. So here I bring up the next color, which is Vallejo Game Air Squid Pink. And once again, it's going to be the same method. I'm going to use a little bit of the previous blend of magenta or the pure magenta with the pink. And then I slowly build up the colors. So here you can see me just mix the paint on the palette and then I scrape off the excess. I've actually now switched to a eyeshadow brush. So it's just the same as the crease brush, but it's smaller, giving me more control over the areas where I actually put the paint in. So it's essentially the same logic as the previous crease brush, but again, this smaller, it's angled, so I can try to get to those nooks and crannies that typically are hard to reach, especially for normal dry brushing. Those nooks and crannies will be easily reached by normal Kallyss brushes, but like I said, this is lazy man painting. In here, I'm just, the logic is don't paint too much. Just dry brush, slow build, and you'd be amazed that the entire process here for one of the cats is essentially just an hour. I'm just taking a little bit longer in this video because I'm trying to get the camera to see what I'm painting. But in general, if I wasn't doing it on camera, I can finish a cat with all the colors that I want between 1 to 2 hours. And I've heard a lot of my friends say that it looks airbrushed, but I'm not sure if, it's a lie, but I like my own results, and it seems to me that some people like the end result of my new method as well. So yeah, let's speed this process up while I build the pinks. So here I'm just going to the lightest shade now by adding white. I completely forgot to take a footage of the white paint that I was using, but it was just Arcus base white to get to the lightest shade of pink that I wanted. So here you can see me just highlight more and more of that light pink onto the quills, and you can see it right now, even if I have bad camera work. I'm sorry about that, but hopefully I can improve in the future. But yeah, you can see me just, for that tail, I'm just doing the little bit of pink white in between that tubular shape of the tail. And here you can even see the colors are already brightening up. So here is the final stage. I think this is mostly white pink now. Like there's barely any pink pigment on my brush now. So let's just speed it up and you'll see the final output at the end, which is now a very, very bright pink purple color. You can see it on my hand right there. And here is the final stages for this particular model. Like you can see the shades being built, and like I said, it's just essentially 2 brushes for the entire run. And there you can see like the quills have that sort of gradation, the tail has the gradation. Let's move in for a close-up. Hopefully the camera can see it all. And yeah, you just repeat this process for all of the models and stages of color. So I use the same logic on all of my whites, all of my blues, all of my greens. So with the magic of editing, I've finished up all the purples on all 3 of the cavalry models. And here we are now with me going over the black once more while I fix some of the overspray, for lack of a better word, or overbrush on the model. So I just want them flat black once again, as now we are going to move on to the whites. And as I mentioned, this is a method where you go from dark to light. And now I'm just using, if I remember correctly, army pink or navy gray, but you could use any neutral gray for this shading of white. So here you'll see me mix the gray with the black to get my first layer. And then like usual, I just scrub off the excess in the palette and then test it out on my can so I can see the gradation. And I just go over all the models in that manner. So here we'll speed up time, and I'm just layering that gray as I dry brush everything. I'm dry brushing all 3 of the models at this stage, and it only actually takes me about an hour to get to the final white. I'll skip to the white after, but here you'll just see more of that consistent layering, like from super dark black to black gray to normal gray. And then now I'm ready to add the whites once I was happy with essentially ending at the middle gray from like I mentioned, from super dark black to middle gray. Now I'll be mixing that white into my base gray to get from base gray to as white as I can get it. You can get pretty white with this method, in all honesty, once you'll see the final product. This has been my favorite way to paint white for a while now. I've done it on my MCP models with, what do you call that? My Black Order, and it worked really well. So I was happy to reuse that method here for Warmachine, and going back to my original Retribution of Syra scheme for my Dusk models. And it actually helps because I'm actually also doing the gray on the faces of the cavalry riders, because Dusk models are undead, and compared to my old Retribution elves wherein it was harder to paint the flesh tones, painting the gray skin tones here is the same as painting my white armor all around. I just have to stop before the grays go to white. And here you can immediately see the effect of adding white to the gray models. So it instantly bumps up the values to a noticeably whiter scale. So let's speed up time, and you'll see me paint all 3 models in the same manner, with just mixing from gray to light gray to white and pure white. And once again, through the magic of anything, I am speeding up about 10 minutes of footage into roughly a minute to 2 minutes. I don't remember the exact compression scale. But yeah, you can see me just go over here with the gray white and then all the way up until white. whilst reducing the amount of paint I actually cover. I want to still keep that gradation and create some shadows in the areas that I don't paint white over. So if you look at the model close-up, we'll show it in a minute. You will see that I retain that gradation. So the areas where the light would hit directly on the model, it's super white. The areas which should have shadows, you'd see it go from white to gray to black. So it's effectively airbrushing a model without an airbrush. I could actually just go use my airbrush, but I don't want to do all the equipment maintenance and everything anymore. So this is a method that works really well for me. And like I said, it doesn't really need a good painter to make your models look good. All you have to know is the logic of light to dark and not being overly generous with the dry brush. You want to keep that gradient level. And here's the close-up. Hopefully you see it on the camera. Let me just show it clearer. And you'll see there's still lights and darks in that white. And then the solid whites are still super white. So yeah, let's move on to the next color. So this is technically another day of filming. I did not have enough time to actually finish the paint job in the previous recording session. But overall, like I mentioned, I think it just took me a grand total of about 2 to 3 hours to paint everything. So all in all, it's just an hour for each model in essence. But I could be faster, but because I'm filming, I'm actually trying to see if I can get the camera to catch what I'm doing. And I know I'm doing a pretty bad job at it so far. But yeah, for this new day, I just decided to touch up a little bit of that gray on the faces and hair of the cavalry riders. And I think I retouched the black on the areas wherein I oversprayed too much for the grays and whites. So I still had to, clean up the section where I want green, clean up the sections where I wanted it blue. For this day, I believe I only focused on putting in the green tassels, the leather straps on the cats, and then all the object source lighting blues that I plan to do. So yeah, I'll skip the blacks and move on to the greens. So I started off with a base green of Arcus Forest Green, or just plain green. I don't remember the actual name. And then I'll reveal the rest of the color mixture as well. So I go from black to Arcus Green to GW Goblin Green, if I remember it correctly. And then finally, a hint of Arcus Pure Yellow. So the logic is, once again, you go from super black to black green to solid green, and then your light green is applied with the Goblin Green. And then you gradient that. Like I said, you only paint the areas that you really want highlighted. You want to keep the greens and blacks on the shadow side. And then once you're happy with the base light green, you go with the yellow, or at least add yellow to your mixture to brighten up that Goblin Green into like yellow-green colors. So in here, I'm speeding up the footage. I think it took me about another 10-15 minutes, maybe less, because I only really cared about just the skirts on these riders. So it's just, very small area of focus to add that green in. And once I was happy, I then move on to my next set of colors, which are the brown bone white leather straps on the cats. So here I start with the Arcus Burnt Umber, and then I believe my next color was the GW Doombull Brown. I might be wrong, but it's a very mid-bright. And then finally I add the Arcus Light Yellow. It's closer to GW's old Bone White color palette, but I don't remember the exact names. I did not really show it on the camera, but yeah. So I go from the usual super dark black into the burnt umber, and then gradient that into the middle brown, and then finally highlight with the bone white. So I'm getting some of the belts. I wanted some of the belts to be darker than the arm wrist straps on the cat, so that I have some point of focus to show the viewer. And then I actually also paint the ground some sort of brown as well, so that you could see that there's a bit of basing happening. I'll add flocking at a different stage here. I'm only focusing on the painting. So yeah, like I mentioned, I am gradiating it from black to some sort of bone white at the most lighted segments. So once I was happy with that, I finally moved on to the most exciting part, which was the blue object source lighting glows on the cats and the weapons. So here you'll see me once again go over the areas I oversprayed with black, cleaning everything up. And then finally I start with the blues. I believe my very dark blue was Cantor Blue from GW or Citadel. And then I move on to Techless Blue, and if I'm not mistaken, the last blue was Skink Blue or some sort of Lizardman Blue. I keep forgetting the names. I'm really bad at the names of my paints. But yeah, and then finally you add white to that blue mixture to get to the lightest blue that you could ever have without going next to it. So here, once again, like I said, I retouch the areas that I want black, the ones with overspace. So you'll see me add black to the gems of the armor, the sword, and essentially the gems and the sword. So those were my blue source lighting. And then here you can see mix the Cantor Blue with the black. And then I just go over them and layer. Once I was happy with that, I go to the Cantor Blue and again was mixing it with black, dabbing it on the areas that I want highlighted. And then, like I mentioned, always reducing the area that I'm actually coloring once I move to the next level of color. So once I finally get to the pure Cantor Blue, that's when I add the Techless Blue, and then just, like I said, as always, dabbing it on, reducing the area you're coloring. And in here, it's actually pretty fine if you overspray a little, because it kind of cheats the object source lighting effect. So let's say on the area where the sword is close to the face, I actually don't mind if I overspray a little on the character's face. So, it's a glowing magical sword. That's the logic of it. So if you move it close to your face, you're gonna have a little bit of that color splash onto you. So yeah, like I said, just go slowly build your colors up. Now I'm adding the Techless Blue, again, mixing it with the previous colors, and then moving up, lessening your area, and then once you're happy, you'll see a very nice colored miniature. And it's essentially Ooga Booga brain dead caveman painting style. So if you're like me, you don't really have a lot of time to paint your models and you want to cheat out some good effects like blending, layering, and all of that fancy schmancy painting guides that people do, you can do it for easier and cheaper, provided it's not close up. Because one of the errors, or at least flaws of this mentality, of this method, is you might end up with a chalky looking figure, especially because you're using very pure unthinned paints. I only have like a drop of water on my brushes here, and I do that to just try and get rid of that stippling effect wherein it looks super chalky. So here you can see me now adding the final whites to the mixture, and then once I finish this, I'll show the end product wherein I glam it up in a light box and I've already based the models. So here is the final output in a light box. So you can see that, at least for me, it looks really good. However, like I mentioned, If you actually zoom in, you can see the chalky texture. But if you're pretty happy with that, or you don't care if it looks chalky like I do, and you're more concerned about how it looks on the table, this is something for you. So if you like more of these content, please let me know. If you think that I could do better, please let me know how you want me to film it. Like, any general advice at all will help. So I hope you learned something from this, or is this a method that you want to try out? And just leave it down in the comments below. If you need more clear instructions, again, leave it in the comments below. So as always, kick ass with honor, game with glory, progress, not perfection. Peer out. Bye-bye.